briefly, this is a slide I've done a lot of times over the years just to try to illustrate the way that we look at the gaming market. So, and people love donuts, so this is usually a good way to explain it. So if you look at like a donut and you imagine that middle part is really what you view as that hardcore gaming market. And I'd use World of Warcraft when it came out. You look at, let's say, that EverQuest or Ultima Online audience, or right now with Hearthstone and card battlers, you're looking at that hardcore group that already loves collectible card games. And we definitely want to service that group. But really, where we see the opportunity is opening up that market to a much larger group that has been previously, let's say, inaccessible because the game's too complex, or there's too much jargon, or it's too hard to get into, whatever it is. We really like to find those games that have a lot of hardcore loyalty and then figure out what are the ways that we can make that game more accessible to a larger market. So these are, just kind of examples. Another example, like this one isn't as relevant today, but we used to be really known for having games that are technologically not as far advanced as other companies, but this was also part of the same strategy. We really wanted, when we were in the PC gaming market, to have games that had low system requirements so the most people possible could play them, because that was another one of those hurdles back in the day. Like id Software or Epic would come out with these amazing games, but you had to go to the, go and buy a $200 graphics card just to be able to play them. And we would rather come out with a game like StarCraft back in the day, which was still a 2D game, even though people are already making 3D RTSs, but come out with a 2D game that had amazing gameplay, but had a much bigger market. So now I'm going to get a little bit into the Blizzard design values. So I did this thing, I guess it was about 5-6 years ago, where I was trying to figure out, like if you imagine just the Blizzard game design department as its own almost standalone company, what would it be its corporate values? Like, are there a set of values that we make our decisions based on, and that's what leads to a lot of our games? And I've really become a fan of really trying to codify values, because it really helps large teams and companies to really have their compass heading. Because it's one thing when I know a lot of people here are on these really small teams, so it's very organic and you can talk to everybody every day. But within Blizzard, if you look at something like the World of Warcraft team, which is over 200 developers nowadays, I don't have the opportunity to walk to each developer every day and be talking to them about why to make certain decisions the way you do. So it really becomes much more important to kind of have these values that people understand, and allows them to make their decisions based on kind of these sorts of values. So this is just a big list of what they are. And I've actually done like an hour-and-a-half long talk just on all these values. So I'm not going to do that today. What I figured I would do is kind of give you more of the highlights to kind of just see how some of this works and what some of these values are. So this is kind of the most important value, and this is actually also one of the Blizzard corporate values. Like, we have this big statue on our campus of an orc wolf rider, and around the statue we have our 8 core values for the company, and the first one is this one, which is gameplay first. And what this, like I was kind of mentioning, what this really means to us is that everyone that's making a game needs to understand how their part, what they're doing, whether or not they're an artist, a programmer, a sound designer, a game designer, what it is that's going to make the game more fun to play, and that's really what we're focused on. And I think there's some companies, like for example, like BioWare or recently Naughty Dog, that I think they're more like story-first companies, which I think is perfectly fine. And there's a lot of people that really enjoy those games, just like as there's people that enjoy our games. But I think, in all game design and companies, you kind of make these choices of what your company or your games are going to be about. And for us, it's really gameplay. And we will sacrifice things very often to bring the gameplay forward. So this is like another one of our values, which is, what is the fantasy? And I think this especially is important because all of our games are genre games. We do stuff in science fiction, we do stuff in fantasy, and within those genres especially, but I think this works for other games too, whenever you show an image to somebody or you talk about some sort of mechanic, people are going to have some sort of fantasy of what that is. And you really want to deliver on that fantasy if you want it to be powerful in the first place. So like, I just put a character like this on screen, and you probably already, even if you've never played World of Warcraft, you're going to start, imagining attributes of what this character is going to be like. He's going to be strong and powerful and probably be able to beat up a lot of other guys, right? So when you start doing game design and gameplay, you better make sure that the game actually supports that visual fantasy in front of it. And we'll very oftentimes talk internally, and we'll ask that question of what is the fantasy? Are we delivering on the fantasy? So, like this is an example of a similar sort of character, but this is a healer. So you can see this guy, he's holding someone and he's trying to bring them back to life. So a lot of what we were trying to do in World of Warcraft is, okay, if someone's going to take this role and someone's going to be a healer, you kind of imagine what that might feel like, and are you delivering a visceral reaction of being able to save someone, be able to support someone, bring someone back to life, and have them look into your eyes and be like, thank you so much. Like that's the fantasy you want to deliver. Now, the funny thing about this is actually what the game ends up looking like. And, this is, I view this really as a fail, because even though, you have this clear idea of what a fantasy is, what ends up happening in the game is people have all these different user interface mods, and what they're really doing is just clicking whenever the health bars go low. And you're just not delivering on that fantasy at all, So, and that's another thing I think is important about the Blizzard culture, is really being critical of your mistakes. I could sit up here and tell you guys all about all the awesome stuff we've done and how smart we are, but that's not how we actually get better. We get better by going, wow, we really failed on delivering on the fantasy of being a healer in World of Warcraft, right? So this is actually one of my favorite values, which is make everything overpowered. So, when I first started at Blizzard, it was doing game balance on StarCraft. And, I really had a lot of fun doing that job and, tweaking numbers and replaying the game. And, I'd play as Zerg, I'd play as Protoss, as Terran. And, I really wanted to be equally skilled at all of them and just play constantly and tune the game. But the thing I kind of learned as I was doing that job is you can't balance based on the math if you want to have the game be the most fun. I mean, it's actually not that hard to mathematically balance games oftentimes. You could do it in spreadsheets. But where the fun comes in is that every single unit or race or class, whatever it is, should feel unstoppable. It should feel unbalanced. It should be one of those things, when I play the Zerg and I'm swarming you with tons of units, I just feel unstoppable. But you actually are stoppable by a totally different sort of strategy by the other side, and they should have that same visceral reaction that they feel overpowered. And then you want to balance to that point. And this is an interesting little point that I remember, like Sid Meier, who made the Civilization series, he came out and did a talk at Blizzard, and he kind of made this comment, and I kind of stole it and thought it was a really interesting point, which is oftentimes making something epic is just as easy as making something normal. So this is like a picture of a Fel Reaver. So you can see like the sense of scale with the characters, and this particular model was actually made to be much smaller. He was supposed to be maybe twice the size of a character. And game designers, being who we are, will oftentimes go into the game and just scale something uniformly and make it bigger, which makes the artist really angry at us. But it makes it much more epic and just inherently becomes more cool. And this concept of making everything overpowered, it kind of applies to the story too. All of our characters are larger than life. Like if you talk about the history of Warcraft, everything seems to be like 10,000 years ago. It's just this amazing history. We never talk about something that's, 100 years ago or 200 years ago. I don't even think we fleshed out that history. It's always 10,000 years or older. And I kind of touched on this a little bit, but I think there's a lot of tendency with balance designers to balance to mediocrity. It's like they take away all the things that actually make the game fun. Like to use other like real-time strategy game examples, there's this really common strategy in RTS games, which is called like a rush strategy, where you very, very early in the game, ignore all defense and teching up your tech tree and just build units as fast as you can to catch the other guy off guard. And oftentimes you'll have players, in your community kind of cry out foul and say, that's not fair. I wasn't even prepared. They're just going straight offense. And I like to preserve those types of things. Those are the types of things, as long as there's a way for the opponent, if they're playing well and doing their scouting and doing their reconnaissance, to know that was coming, then I actually think more of those strategies and more of those tactics are going to make your game more interesting and last for much longer. Control is king. So this is really about the game controls and how does the character feel responsive. Does the mouse cursor feel responsive, whatever it is. Like, this is something that I think a lot of games skip a little bit. Like, there'll be a lot of games that I'm sure you've played them where you have the controller and the character just feels a little floaty. He feels like, doesn't feel as substantial to the world, like the animation isn't there. There was this story I had about when I was making Warcraft 3, where I could just feel like there's a little bit of mouse cursor lag, and I kept on having this argument with my lead software engineer. He kept on saying, no, there's no lag in it, but I just kept on bugging him until finally he did some diagnostics and put in a hardware mouse cursor, and we found like 2 frames of mouse lag. It's like, but these are the sorts of things that people are never going to complain about, because most players are not sensitive to it at a kind of a normal level. It's very much more subconscious. So it's something that, unless you drive this into your culture and make sure that your software engineers and your designers really care about this stuff, then it's never going to be there. So another good example of how these sorts of values translate into decisions is this example. Because the reason I think values are important is that inevitably when you're doing game design, you're going to come to a point where you have to make a decision of what's more important to you. And there is this good example in Warcraft where we had horses. And the way that horses currently work in Warcraft is that you just click a button and this horse appears out of nowhere. And if you attack somebody or you get rid of the horse just disappears in a puff of smoke, which, you could argue is immersion breaking. It doesn't feel very realistic. It looks kind of stupid. We get those comments all the time. And we even played around with doing cool horse animations. Like, they had this cool idea in Zelda where you'd see the horse running up from the distance and your character would animate and jump on top of it, which is cool. It would give you more immersion. And if, let's just say, one of our Blizzard design values was immersion first, then I think that would have been the right choice to make. But for us, we're about gameplay is first and control is king. So we made the decision that, yeah, it's going to be a little immersion breaking, it's going to be a little goofy, but what it means is, if a monster's coming at you, you can instantly get into combat. And that is a choice that we made that we felt was more important. Another example is just like standing up, we have this thing where if you stand up in World of Warcraft, you can instantly start moving, which looks a little wrong because you'll see your character will kind of be doing this standing up animation and sliding and moving at the same time. But it makes the controls feel really responsive again. So those are choices that were conscious choices. Those weren't just bugs. Those were decisions, conscious decisions we made because this was a really important value to us. So avoiding the grand reveal. This one is, I'm kind of getting into process values a little bit right now. So what this really means, and I think all creative people are like this, and I'm sure most people in this room are like this, where you don't really oftentimes like to pitch ideas until you've thought through it a lot. Because people inherently don't like people to criticize them on their work when they already know it's bad. So people oftentimes will be like, I'm going to take this idea into a corner, and I'm going to polish it and work on it and polish it and work on it until I finally show it to a larger group, which is actually the exact opposite of what you should do if you want to have the best possible product. Because everyone around you, especially in cross-discipline teams, are going to have such different perspectives on what's going right and what's going wrong with whatever it is that you're working on, that you want to actually get all that feedback early, before you're emotionally committed to whatever it is that you're working on, because it's like, because people oftentimes have that, and you also are going to waste a lot less work. So, and I'll get into an example about this in just a second. It's and we're very iteration-based. So it's much better to keep on working on things and get that feedback again, keep on working on things, getting that feedback again, because I really believe that the more iteration loops that we're able to have on the game, the better the game's going to be when we finally ship. So this is an example of the Blood Elf city in World of Warcraft, which is called Silvermoon. And the way that we developed it, because it was going to be our biggest city we'd ever made, going back to that epic thing, it's got to be epic. So it was so big that we actually couldn't make it on, simultaneously within, I think it was 3ds Max we were working on at the time, and one computer couldn't render the entire thing and realistically work in it. So we had actually deconstruct into parts and make like districts, and it was so much effort to weld it back together to actually put it into the game that we just didn't do it very often. So it took over a year to create, and when we finally put it into the game, it was beautiful, but it was a labyrinth. I mean, you just could not find your way around the city. It was hard to find out where your trainer was, and ultimately, people really hated the city, and it kind of became this ghost town city for us. And it would have been one of those things that if we would have been iterating on that from the beginning, we could have had a beautiful city that also was super playable. But it was just, I think, a big process fail for us. And, we even now have coined terms, are you silvermooning? Because if an artist or a programmer is kind of going off into their corner and working on a system, we actually have slang for it now. So this is like the exact opposite. So we had this zone called Arathi Basin, which is a battleground in World of Warcraft where you play against other players on teams. And this was the first map we iterated on. So we were able to actually have a 2D map that looked like this. It looks almost like an old Atari 2600 game. And we could just talk about where the sides are and what are the points of interest. And then this was actually our first 3D version within the game. And you could actually play it. And we'd actually have it up and running that way. And it allowed us to really work through all those playability and gameplay things before the artist made it look awesome. So I think that was a much better example of, I think, our process going forward as much as possible. And this is the last big value I'm going to talk about, even though I know there's others. So one of the things that Blizzard's really known for is people always talk about our games as being super polished. And the general assumption with that is that people think that means that we just get 6 months more than everyone else to make our games, and there's always this criticism, well, I wish we could have as much time as Blizzard does. And the thing is that obviously it is true that we're very fortunate to have more time, but we weren't always like that. I mean, we had to earn that trust from our publishers or from our audience to be able to do that. And we, like everyone else, had to earn that ability. But the truth of the whole culture of polish is that it doesn't happen at the end. It's not like we put a bunch of crap into the game and then in the last 6 months make it awesome. I mean, we are actually polishing from the beginning. And this is a picture of just how we'd originally do zones in World of Warcraft. We'd do them up on the whiteboard. Chris Metzen would get up there and just draw a map. And the great thing about a whiteboard is it's dry erase, and you can actually move coastlines and you can move cities, really quickly. And we would sit there and talk about, well, maybe it should be here, or maybe it should be there, or how close should the Horde and Alliance bases be to each other? And we're polishing even at a prototype level, right? So it kind of happens throughout the entire process. Another thing that I think the reason I call this culture of polish is because if your team is made up with people that actually love the game as a player, they're going to inherently just be polishing the game all the time. Because what's really great is when you get to a place where you don't have to have the one guy or the testing department sending out the bugs and sending out, here's all the things that have to be polished. The team is playing the game every night, and then they come in the next day because they were frustrated something happened last night, and they fix that bug without anyone having to tell them or task them. We actually had, it's kind of a funny story, one of our programmers on the World of Warcraft team, they actually left Blizzard and went to go work for another company for a couple years. And then he came back to us and wanted to come back to Blizzard. And for a few different reasons, but one of the reasons was he still was an avid World of Warcraft player, and he wanted to get hired again so he could fix all the things that were bothering him from playing every night. So he was super excited to get back in the company. He already had a task list of stuff he wanted to fix. Strike teams. So this is something that goes pretty far back into Blizzard history and has really become like this institutional thing. What we do is when a game gets to a point where it's generally pre-alpha, so the game is playable or there's chunks of the game that are playable, and we want to start getting some really good qualitative feedback, we will go to the other teams and we will get a selection of players. And it's usually across disciplines and across skill levels. So what we'll do is we'll get some artists, some software engineers, a producer, some game designers. We'll get people that are experts at that genre, people that are mediocre, people that have never been exposed to the genre. And it's usually about like 8 to 10 people. And usually there'll be a game director that actually coordinates the team. And we will have them do structured play tests of that game content in the game. And then the game director is basically kind of focusing that group and drawing out the comments. And they're always a game director from another team. And this is one of the things that's really important is that all the people on the strike team are not on the team that's making the game. And they give feedback back into that team. And it's really been this great process that I think has been really key to why a lot of our games have been successful, because we're, again, able to do more iteration loops, and we're getting a real big cross-section of feedback from people. And this goes into the kind of this every voice matters concept, which is you really want to listen to everybody. And now, the key thing, though, about every voice matters, a lot of people think that means that we listen to everybody, or we do what everyone says, which is not the same thing. Listening is not necessarily acting. And there's going to be times that the feedback might go against what you eventually do, but you always want to hear the feedback. You always want to get all that information, and then as the game designer, make a smart decision on which feedback you're going to act on, which feedback is noise, which feedback you're just okay with living with. And then when you get into so strike teams are almost like this first phase of what we've been talking about is like this rings of exposure of the game. So it's the first time that people outside the team starts playing the game with strike teams. But then the game will eventually kind of get into what we call an alpha state. And I'll be the first one to tell you that Blizzard's definitions of alpha and beta are probably not the same definitions as yours. So we've morphed the definitions. Alpha typically, I think in the software world, means feature complete. To us, it's not feature complete. What alpha means to Blizzard is it's ready for the uninitiated within the company to play the game. So there's oftentimes lots of features that are not in yet. There's stuff that's not polished. What it really just means is we're really ready now for the entire company to start playing the game and giving us feedback about the game. So what's really important about alpha, there has to be, the core gameplay loop has got to be fun. And there's got to be fun within the game everywhere. Because if we haven't actually found fun, then we shouldn't be having the company play it yet. So then once we get kind of the alpha out, then we kind of get to beta. And then beta for us also is actually not feature complete. And this is kind of by design sometimes. Like, I'll give you an example. Back when I was doing Warcraft 3, I went to beta before I even designed all the units for the races. And the reason that I did that was because one of the primary reasons that we do beta tests is to find game balance issues. So it's kind of like stability and game balance are why we do betas. A lot of people think we do betas maybe for bug testing. We don't really. Even though we do get some bug testing information out of our betas, that's not the purpose for them. We have a great QA department that finds all those. We do get kind of a cross-section of what's fun about the game, but usually we're fine on that. What we don't usually know until we go to a very broad audience is finding all the big balance issues. Because most of our games, just about all of our games, have a serious competitive element to them. And even though we have a lot of amazing game players within Blizzard, it's a very small community and a small company. Once you go kind of worldwide, you're going to draw in the hardest core of the hardcore into your betas, and they will find strategies and break your game in ways that no one internally would have found yet. So that's oftentimes what we're doing in our beta tests, is really finding all those game balance edges. So to go back to the Warcraft 3 example, one of the things I decided to do after doing Brood War was in Warcraft 3, I went to beta leaving unit slots open on each race. because one of the things that I found was the most helpful when I made Brood War was adding units to affect game balance, because that's one of your most powerful tools in the toolkit, is being able to add an entire unit to affect the game balance of the game. So I decided in Warcraft 3, well, let's just go to beta and know, from our production budget-wise, we had units left to make. And then once I was in the beta for about a month, we kind of finalized the unit designs and put those into the game and finished the game. World of Warcraft, we didn't even have all the zones playable. Like when we first started going into beta test, I think the game was only playable up to like level 30. We didn't have the auction house in the game. We didn't have durability. There's all kinds of features that weren't in the game yet. But it was fine for us because we really wanted to have players playing the game every day, because we were ready for that sort of feedback and the game was stable enough for it. And it allowed us to keep on doing more iteration loops now with a player base. And then probably the most important thing for us is don't ship until the game's ready, which I think is it's interesting, because I think it's a little bit opposite what I think Silicon Valley companies are now saying. I think what they're saying is minimum viable product. You ship when you have that and you build your audience. But for us, it might work in the startup world, but for us, if you go back to that first that strategy slide, it would take away from our brand at this point. Everyone knows if you see a Blizzard game come out, it's going to be awesome. So it's important for us to never really break that contract with our players and our audience, because that's going to take away from the equity of that brand. And this has probably been the most important thing to us, and it's also been the thing that we've actually canceled projects that are public to people, because, again, we're just not going to ship those games until they're ready, and that's the most important thing. All right. That is all I had for you all, and now we have, I know, the conversation. Joey.